it over to Noncy to get us started.
All right, friends. All right, so I'm just going to put it out there. My inspiration to the work that I kind of embarked on was Dr. Bettina Love. And so I'm passing out permission slips today to everybody that's here because I'm giving you permission to go all in on this work. Now, Dr. Bettina Love, in her book, We Want to Do More Than Survive, Abolitionist Teaching and the Pursuit of Educational Freedom, she talks about what abolitionist teaching is. And I want to start with this definition because to me, it's just the heart of our work. Now, she says abolitionists want to eliminate what is oppressive, not reform it, not reimagine it, but remove oppression from its roots. And so I believe that's who we are here. I'm starting like that's our baseline. I want to say that's who we're talking to right now. She also says abolitionists want to understand the conditions that normalize oppression and uproot those conditions. So we're going to talk about some of the research you're going to have to embark upon in order to do this abolitionist teaching work. And then abolitionists want to build conditions that create institutions that are just, loving, equitable, and center back Black lives. All right, so right there, we're talking about transforming education, transformational curriculum. And so right now, I'm a teacher, y'all, so I'm giving you a permission to embark on this work. Okay, next slide. So, friends, I'm giving you permission to give yourself some grace. When my co-author, Julie, and I started working on our unit, we look back and laugh because, we were excited. We were chosen to participate in the grant process, the curriculum writing. And that like for months, we were like this here person with the writer's block. We would talk, we would, and we have meetings, and then it's like, well, what are we going to write? What are we going to teach? So I want you to give yourself permission to go through that part of the process, because if you're anything like we were, we first had to do research. We had to research this. Most of the stuff that we're actually teaching our students, we had not been taught in school. So once we realized where we were in the process, for us, we weren't ready to actually go in and start writing. We actually needed to do some research. That's where we were able to lean into the process and actually enjoy it and enjoy the research, right? So we went to ancient African temples. We met kings, we met queens and warrior queens. We met scholars who proved that the enslaved were not ignorant, right? Like they when they got here, they had a religion, they had a language, they had writings, right? They written language. So all these things that I had not been taught in school, we were uncovering. And so give yourself time to say, you know what, I got to do some research. I want to learn for myself, right? To help you become a better teacher, right? So that's where we were. So you have permission to not necessarily put pen to paper the first month or two whenever you start the process. And you also have permission to do a personal journey on your own project. Julie and I, our unit was, uncovering and reclaiming historical identities. It really was a unit for us. It was a unit for little Nancy and little Julie because we had not learned about any of this stuff growing up. All right, let's go to the next slide, because this one to me, um, hmm, this one, I gotta let you know that also part of the process, you may have to step back and do some self-care. At one point, I remember calling Julie and saying, I gotta stop. Because guess what I was uncovering through all that recess or all that research? I was uncovering pain. I was uncovering hidden histories about my ancestry that would have actually helped me hold my head up high when they started talking about colonial America, right? So I want to give yourself some grace to step back and heal from learning everything, and then put on that warrior's cape, right? And get that curriculum writing sword, right? And then start putting pen to paper. I will tell you that we can talk about it later, but it's not always fun and games. I mean, there can be some pushback when you get embark on this work. And so we can talk about the playbook, right? There's a playbook already out there against you that you're going to have to go up against. You want to know what moves to make to counter the playbook. And so these are the things. That's why it's so important to have forums like this so we can talk. But you put on that warrior suit, right? And go to battle for our kids, right, in this Black-centered curriculum. All right. And the lastly slide, it's dear to my heart and Julie's heart. And I'm giving you permission, friends, to look up on the 1619 Project's website the ERS, the identity resource screening tool that Julie and I were able to design off of doing this work, because we learned about curriculum violence. We learned about how currently our curriculum, right, starts Black history with oppression, right? And so this tool will help you sandwich true history with, right? Like we went back and what this is like a portion of the earth, just so you know, it's a flow chart. It's a tool to help you make very informed decisions on the materials that you bring into your classroom, especially looking out for marginalized communities. But we put on this part of the slide just how before we even before we got to 1619 people, we went back into ancient history. So by the time we got to 1619 Virginia, Port Comfort, our students had seen the enslaved as scholars and cousins and grandmothers and cooks and mathematicians, right? They were humanized. And so this tool will help you engage in the work by sandwiching the oppression with the joy and the celebration. So definitely take a look at that. And with that, I'm ready to pass it on to the next panelist that's even going to get you more excited about what's the work you can embark on. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Yes, well, my name again, it's Shauna Russell. I'm a teacher, some administration, but just always a student at Purpose Prep Academy in Nashville, Tennessee. And our work began not necessarily with an idea of creating curriculum. So like before we had heard of the 1619 education project or ways we could think about curriculum. In the summer uprisings of 2020, me and a few other teachers worked with organizers who spoke of a place called Promised Land. So there had been some local organizers who had made a visit to this place called Promised Land, a community one county over, founded in the Reconstruction period by a land grant from United States Colored Troops veterans. They had built a community around two pillars, a church and a school. And from there, our school leadership team had a retreat there. Staff did field trips, and we really began our relationship with the original descendants, which became what started our official work. So Promised Land, this is a picture of their one-room schoolhouse, and this is their self-described legacy, a legacy of strength, courage, and fortitude. So Promised Land and ancestors even before them had been stewarding a strong value for education and literacy against death-defying odds for centuries. So especially the history of public education in the South for Black children for many years was life or death. It was something you had to steal and do in hiding. And the descendants were very well of this through or very aware of this through oral history. But also as one descendant, Ms. Della told me on one of our initial planning calls, led her to want to become a teacher and a principal. And this was many decades before our school was even founded. And she said that will always try to rewrite the truth, and there will always be people like that, but it is our obligation to not be a part of that. So this sort of assuredness and resistance without fear from primary source people really inspired us to pursue further collaboration. And we started with building our own historical knowledge in ourselves. This is a crucial preparation step of making sure that the teachers and staff who are going to be involved had strong content knowledge on the real history of America and what was in our own backyard and their own backyard. So these are some examples of on the left, like one of the original 8th grade classes. There was generations before then who were learning in the one-room schoolhouse. In the first generation, there was a single teacher with over 80 students from ages 4 to 19. So this was in like the 1880s. And that legacy considered 50, 60 years. Residents began leaving around the time of the Great Migration, and then the school closed later around the time of integration. But something really beautiful that we uncovered in our research is that Promised Land graduates had a reputation for academic excellence, and disproportionately represented as top scholars and valedictorians in the high schools that they went on to. And that is something that you still cannot find in any museum or history book. We learned that from the alum and the children of alum themselves. And you can jump to the next slide. Thank you. So our work was a little different in how most educators are trained to plan your lesson objectives first when you're doing curriculum writing, but the relationship building and site visits and content knowledge I shared is what came first and then pushed us towards the following essential questions. To sum it up, we grounded ourselves in Nikita Stewart's 1619 essay, Why Can't We Teach This? With our students, specifically in contrast to House Bill 580, which was, if you're familiar, it was Tennessee legislation from the time that wanted to ban any insinuation that Tennessee or the United States was quote unquote fundamentally racist, and which we know it is and has been structured to be. So we took that approach to looking at that article, and before we even started talking about Promised Land with kids. And then the endpoint or the culminating project or praxis they did was they wrote a textbook chapter that specifically was supposed to be illegal. We encouraged them to write a textbook chapter that would be banned. From the primary source knowledge. So going to the site, interviewing Della and Serena and others, and then understanding and going meta about how this very act itself is resistance. So what did we learn about preparation? Final slide, please. If I had to, hold on, you might have to hit refresh. I think there's one missing, but I tried to sum it up into 3 key things that we learned. One is to start with grounding and codifying from your own background. So the truth is out there, and for us that meant historical site, driving distance from Nashville that we were connected with because of some resource sharing and food drop off during a summer protest. But you have degrees of separation and proximity to really rich knowledge within your teams, within your stakeholders, especially oral history. And if you start from what you have is rich, and will give life to your project even more. The second, yay, that's right. Okay. And then the second is dream big. So I think I was pretty intimidated when we started this work that it was too ambitious, right? We were going to do K-5 curriculum, and there was a community component, and there was this, but I'm so glad that we started with a really big vision, because what happened is it turned into a 2 to 3 year plan. And now we have teachers, staff members, even parents starting to pick up carrying the vision of this work because there's so many ways to plug in. And then the final piece, I think the Sankofa team talked about this as well, is so critical to build the content knowledge of your stakeholders, and to assume the status quo. So assume that people have not been taught real American history. And that means being very literal with what it looks like to build content knowledge, assigned readings, video webinar discussions, site visits. And for folks who have been robbed of the true history of America, this takes time and healing. You might have to adjust your timelines. For the folks who have not been robbed of that, it gives them leadership capacity to really go self-reflective about why they know what they know, and then become really vocal advocates for the work. So those are our 3 kind of advice and recommendations. We're definitely still learning. But that's where we are in the process. Thank you so much.
All right. Hello, everyone, again. So I'm going to talk to you a bit about my experience in our 1618 cohort and what it means to prepare for this work. So just a quick overview about my school's background. I do teach at an international baccalaureate or IB school, and our unit was done as an interdisciplinary unit between the English and government departments. And when we first put this curriculum together, it reached approximately 400 students. And you can see here, these are my wonderful teammates who helped make this all really possible. Sarah Rogers, Amy Sampson, Lena Taj-John, Morgan Kane, and then me as project lead. All right, next slide. So in preparing for this work, I wanted to think about the difference in how you prepare your staff and how you prepare your students. So in preparing staff, it's really important that you build a team. Trying to do this work all by yourself is going to be really difficult. You want to have a support system. You want to have people who have the same vision as you or a similar vision as you and can help bring this to life. You want to be able to collaborate with the team, and this can include stakeholders in and out of the school building. So it can be community partners, parents, and families. Build a team and collaborate as much as possible. When doing this work and preparing staff, you want to make sure you're being organized and delineating roles as needed. Everybody has a strength and everybody has something they can bring to the table to make this work real and to make this work manifest itself so that it can best fit the needs of your students. I would also say when preparing staff, conduct research and gather feedback and be open to discussion. This is not a dictatorship. It is a community-driven type of work. It is all about how you can uplift everyone in the community and get everybody to understand our real history, our real past, and where we're going. So that brings me to some of the growth things I noticed with preparing staff to do this work in our school system is you want to make sure you're providing context and goals and that you have extended group involvement. So just making sure that the teachers who will have to implement these curriculum, the teachers who have to do this work on a daily basis with the students, that they feel adequately prepared, that they have the information and content knowledge, the skills that are necessary to really do this work in a meaningful way. Another thing is thinking about time. So when is it best to implement this work? The beginning of the school year, middle of the school year, end of the school year? Is it something that you want to be just a unit? Is it something you want to build out to be some sort of program to last the entire year? How do you want to get other stakeholders involved? So just really thinking about that timing and the length of time that you want this work to happen. And then also differentiating guidance and training to, again, just prepare staff and make sure that everybody feels well equipped to implement this information to the students. All right, next slide. When preparing students, we found it really important that we use differentiation and student choice and voice in this work. So our unit was all about taking the real history of the 1619 project in conjunction with student narratives and with interviews done with their own community and families. And we found that that made this work hit home a lot more for our students and made it a lot more meaningful. It wasn't just about getting new information from a book or from a journal article, but really understanding how the work of the 1619 project impacts us today. And that proved to be really beneficial for our students. Some growth things we noticed with implementing our unit for the first time was, again, the timing, just making sure that students are prepared for this work emotionally. Sometimes as educators, we're used to thinking about what are the skills they're going to learn and the content they're going to learn. But sometimes we forget to think, how is this going to make our students feel? And that's really important, especially with our Black and Brown students. This can be really triggering material for them and very new material for them. So you want to make sure you're keeping account of how are your students going to feel? How may they possibly react to this work? And that is what leads to the starting small and having family involvement. Prepare families for this work. Let them know that this is going to be some heavy stuff, but it's real and it's important. And we're going to be with you every step of the way as we do this work together. And then I'm just going to end with Again, making sure you're being flexible with students, because we all know kids will be kids and they will throw you curveballs no matter how much you prepare. So be flexible and willing to move the way your students move so that they can access this work in the best way possible. And then my last slide, just some key takeaways here. Just being transparent when you're doing this work. Try to be as communal as possible when you're making decisions. Again, that importance of utilizing student choice and recognizing that this is something that's going to really impact them for a long time. So it's important to hear from them. Be prepared for big changes, and also to be inclusive and to be diverse. Think about who is in your room. What types of students are in your room? What are their backgrounds? And how can you build on that to make this work even more impactful for everybody involved in and out of the school? Right. And those are my key takeaways.
All right, again, this is Bernice Mayfield, and I want to talk a little more to you about our Exploring Common Roots project. This was a project that came out of my need to understand how to connect my history, my background as an being and having ancestors who were enslaved, how to connect to my students, many who are from Central and South America, many who are from other continents, who maybe did not know, did not understand. And so when I look into those classrooms and see all of these faces, different shades of brown, but not necessarily the same shade, the same background as mine, I'm so happy that this work gave me a chance to see how those things connected. So, in doing this work, I discovered a profound truth. And that truth for me was that until I took the time to examine my own history and how that history shaped my future, my present, and my future, how I show up, how it may limit how I see myself and my potential. Until I did that work for myself, I was not going to be able to support my students in doing that work. So, by confronting my own unexplored past and what was holding me back, it empowered me, equipped me now to guide my students to do the same. And so when I think about what I would say to someone who's going to do this work, that whole self-awareness piece, doing that self-work that other panelists have mentioned is critical. So in empowering them to identify those historical threats in their lives, then they are able to identify those threads that restrain them, those threads that prevent them from moving forward, and to celebrate those strands that are support, those ones that give them the ability to move forward with purpose. The process of being able to honor our ancestors, to honor their sacrifices, to honor their struggles, while also honoring and celebrating their triumphs and their aspirations for their legacy has been a really important part of this work. So by understanding our roots, we cultivate the strength to honor our past while building our future. Next slide, please. The primary goal of the Exploring Common Roots project I teach early childhood educators. So the big idea is to prepare educators who are able to create and to maintain environments where the children and the families feel an authentic sense of belonging. Belonging is something that is very critical, is so important for the children in the classroom. But what I discovered is that often my teachers did not feel that they fully belonged in the educational spaces. They didn't feel maybe that they fully belonged in the college classrooms that they were a part of. I feel very fortunate to live in Northern Virginia where there is so much diversity with the children and the families and with the educators. Our early learning settings truly look like the world when we look at all of the peoples that are there and the spaces in the world that they come to. And so this project has allowed me to scaffold students so that they develop a greater understanding of the connection between their own families, American origin stories, and the origin stories of the descendants of formerly enslaved Americans. And the tool that we used from the 1619 project, the focus tool was that Born on the Water children's book. And if you've not yet read that book, then please do that as a gift to yourself. Reflecting on the discoveries of the research they do for themselves, the research that they do and what they come to understand about those who were formerly enslaved allows them then to apply that knowledge to overcoming hurdles for belonging for the children and families in their programs. Next slide, please. The community response continues to be absolutely amazing. I was very fortunate to be a part of employment settings that celebrate diversity, that embrace it, that held on to it, even when it was hard to hold on to those things. Some of my colleagues, especially in the community college setting, embraced this work. I remember one early conversation and a couple of my colleagues who were part of our media team, African American males, who said, "Are we talking about slavery with this? Are we going there?" And I said, we have to talk about all of the pieces of the history. And so the work was embraced. There are additional media pieces that they created. They involved the students. One of the student responses to the work is here on the page. If you want to see more, go to that 1619 project page, and there are even some video of some of the students and how they responded. They just embraced the work. They embraced each other and were able to celebrate what they learned about, what they learned that was different, what they learned that was the same. Next slide. So the big idea for my students, for me, is that by embracing our shared history, by looking at those roots, by being brave, then we learned together and we grew together because they are the experts on their backgrounds. They are the experts on their history, on their aspirations for their families. So as I continue to learn and to pass on my knowledge to my children and students, I'm grateful to play a role in decreasing the taboo around discussing these historical issues beyond our private spaces. My experience does affirm education's power as a tool for resistance, resilience, transformation, and thriving. And I certainly want to encourage all educators to do everything that you can to create spaces where students can have those experiences. Thank you.
Thank you, Bernice Ann, Noncy, Shauna, and Maya for sharing some of the highlights from your project. And I realized I didn't say earlier that I work in teacher education, mostly with undergrad and graduate students who are thinking about how do we take our values that, and sometimes the recognition that we have not been educated ourselves to understand these histories, to be explicitly anti-racist or abolitionist in our practice with students, and what does it mean to translate our values outwardly. And so even just seeing the collection of the things that you've been doing with your communities and students, it gives me a lot of hope and shows me all the things that are possible. And I know that this is just a taste of what you've experienced and what some of the other alumni from the program have done. So thank you for sharing. And I have a few questions. I've been debating a bit which one to start with, because you've all sort of hinted at pieces of them. But because I'm a literacy person, I was thinking about like a story. Do any of you, one or all of you, have just like a small story or moment that reflects maybe the response from someone who experienced your project, whether a student or a colleague, the early childhood educators? We saw that beautiful quote, Bernice. And so I just wondered if you had just a story of like a moment where you saw how it impacted, or where a student or colleague shared with you what they were learning. Yeah, Bernice, thank you.
So I come from an area of the country that has a really rich history when it comes to African American resistance and triumph. And some of those stories, of course, when I grew up, it was more the struggle. You know, I didn't get to hear the stories of the survival and the thriving until later. So I wasn't sure how my classmates, who are a big part of my social media network, would receive this work. And one of them reached out to me after I posted about the project and shared with me that though her skin color does not match mine, she is now the grandmother to grandchildren whose skin color does match mine. And she said to me very clearly that she found this work to be so important, that she recognizes that she has a role in making sure that her grandchildren know the truth, hear the truth, and that somehow she's got to cover, right, this really complicated, hard history that is a part of their legacy. So that was the one experience that really touched my heart the most, and the one that spoke to the fear that I had, or what are people going to think if I start talking about these things that, as I grew up, we were told you don't talk about outside of your house.
Thank you for sharing. I similarly am a parent to elementary age children who are multiracial. And I think about both what world I want for them and what experiences I want them to have in the classroom, and also what I personally need to do to deal with as a white woman, this dissociation I've learned, and the internalization of whether it was lack of knowledge or very explicit knowledge that impacts my humanity too. So thank you for sharing that really moving story. Noncy, I see your hand.
Yeah, I wanted to share when Julie and I, when we decided to kick off our unit, we held a parent meeting just so all our parents were very clear on what we were about to embark on. And we did have a parent that was like, no way, I don't want my kid to have anything to do with the 1619 project, anything like that. And so we had a supportive principal who said, okay, well, I'll tell you what, we'll keep your kid can work through the workbook, or the, what do you call it, textbook, and we'll have them come out of the classroom when the teachers embark on this unit. And so, but the kid kept hearing all this excitement, like on the playground, that was being generated from the students involved with the unit. So at some point, the kid was going home telling his parents, please let me participate. So they called back to the school and said, can we changed our mind? We want our kid to participate. And so the principal kind of patted us on the back, was like, look, you're changing, the child is right, changing the mindset of parents. It just so happened the lesson that he entered on. So I quilt, and I had made the patterns that were embedded in quilts in the Underground Railroad. And so we had them all laid out. And the students were looking, and they had a little key. And at one point, this little kid just started screaming, it's a map! It's a map! And so those were the parts where we really just got excited that one, the kid changed the parents' mind, and the kids were really engaged with the work to the point where, they were calling in other kids who were at one point kind of set out back. Thanks.
Oh, thank you. I can just imagine the excitement. I have a lump in my throat. Oh, thank you for sharing. Shauna, what about you?
Sure. And it's one part personal lesson that I didn't include on this slide, but it connects to this, is we didn't necessarily anticipate family or scholar pushback given the population we serve. And so we didn't do a sort of parent meeting beforehand. And that's something that we added retroactively, because the first year that we taught our unit, there was a student whose last name was Van Leer, and one of the founding descendants of Promised Land, who was trafficked and survived on the iron plantation in that area's last name was Van Leer, which was, of course, the name of the person who enslaved him and trafficked him. And that came up in our learnings. And so after the fact, we talked with the parents and the scholar and the student. And he ended up being one of the moderators of one of our panels with one of the descendants. And it ended in joy and a beautiful thing, because they actually found out that they, by some degrees of separation, were related, and ended up going to the annual Promised Land art festival reunion that they have annually. So it really ended in a place that is exactly why we do this work, to make sure that there's not continued cultural destruction. But it did start with a place of deep discomfort for everyone and pain, but it ended in a way that was so grounded in our original purpose that I'm glad that it happened. And so is Tyrone Van Leer and his dad.
Wow, thank you, Shauna, for that example also, which makes me think of a question, maybe a little bit about I'm sort of rephrasing one that I thought I was going to ask in my head as I go, but all of you have mentioned several things that supported you as you were entering and creating your units and joining in this work and implementing it, both internal things and external things, right? And you just made me think, Shauna, about some of those potential barriers. And I wonder if any of you have another story about a moment like that. It sounds, Shauna, like you all are very strategic about where you know, uh, shared everything with the community, with parents. But I wonder, like, are there other barriers, either internally or externally, that you found yourself sort of moving through that might provide a little bit of a roadmap or advice for other teachers coming behind you wanting to do that, or who are considering where they will enter into their own journey of racial justice education? Maya, please.
So I touched on this a bit in my presentation, but some pushback we got the first year we implemented this was actually from some of the teachers who felt that the work was too triggering and that it focused so much on Black pain that we didn't want to kind of downtrodden the students with so much Black pain. And that was really important feedback, because we realized that there can be joy in this work as well. The same way this history is really deep and can be really dark, there's also a lot of joy in our history and a lot of triumph. And that was something that we had to become more intentional about and including in our curriculum and including in the work. And we didn't expect to get that kind of pushback. We just assumed, oh, these are great books, great sources of information and history. They're going to be so on board. So to hear teachers say, actually, this might be too much for my students in this way, and we need to find ways to implement more Black joy so that Black and Brown students recognize their history is more than pain, right? That there's more to it than just that. And that this work isn't just about centering pain, it's about centering the entire experience about our history and culture, which includes our joys and triumphs. And that was really, really important for us to hear that first year that we implemented this curriculum. And it really helped us with moving forward in the different sorts of articles and books that we chose, the different activities we did, the way we included student voice. It really helped shift things for us a lot.
Thank you, Maya. And I see some follow-up questions that maybe we can touch on in just a minute. Noncy, what about you?
You know, I want to share, first of all, what Maya just shared is so true, which is what kind of guided us into that earth. And so again, I'm putting out there, the earth is designed, it's a flow chart of questions. So before you even get to the oppression of Black ancestors, the oppression of Indigenous people, the earth forces you to make sure you've centered their joy by introducing, have you even talked about the contemporary people? Like I saw someone was asking about Indigenous people, right? Like, do we talk about in content? They're here right now. So start with the present. They're here, that they're alive and thriving before we go into any pain. And so the earth walks you through that. But I wanted to share, because I had an intern last year, and he was like, Nancy, I feel like I'm being really trained to, be a disruptor. We're reading Dr. Bettina Love's work. I want to be an advocate and all of these things. But his question was the how, like, right? Like you're told to do it. And one of the things I just want to point out is what Julie and I found out was, one, you kind of need, we call it the power of two. You need somebody out there because they have a playbook, right? When you start talking about this, those who are opposed to this work, they have things already out there that they can go to. One, they can isolate you. See, when it's just you and you start trying to push uh, the status quo, they're coming for you. And who do you have when it's by yourself? All you needed was one other person, because they tried that with Julie and I, but we had the power of two. And every time we were like, the power of two, because they would even circle back and, not knowing how connected we were. So you definitely, you need somebody in your corner, because they also try and gaslight you, right? So you need somebody where you turn around and they can push you back up there and say, no, this works. And so I just wanted to push out the earth and how it will help you not correct, do that curriculum, what are they, malpractice and curriculum violence. The earth is all set up so that it won't be just centering around the pain. You wouldn't even get there. I used to do that, but the earth helps with that. And also be ready and put together your own playbook, right? To which we got to start putting together. But a part of the power of two is part of that playbook, having a buddy. Thanks.
Thank you, Nancy. It was a good thing my microphone wasn't on, because I was audibly like responding to several of the things you said. I've been doing some research on with some teachers. I've been thinking about teachers who have been nominated by scholars who are very much committed to the work, to the extent that there are people who are saying, go see what so-and-so's doing. And when I asked about the things that supported them, by a long shot, it was supportive peers, whether they were in their building or not. Some were very isolated. So thank you for the reminder of finding that horizontal support and building a coalition. I think about building your own playbook. Anyway, thank you for sharing your response to that too. So I want to move into some questions I've seen show up in our chat and in our Q&A. So one, I think this may have come up, Maya, while you were speaking, but for any of you, if you engage parents, or for those of you who worked with parents within your project, how did you structure your meetings and communications, or any advice you have in community engagement like that?
I mean, I would say you definitely want to have a conversation with families. So yes, you could easily type up a nice letter or permission slip and send that home. But because a lot of people aren't really aware of what we're trying to do, having some sort of forum or discussion where students can come out and talk one-on-one and answer questions and ask questions and all of that, I think that's a really important step in starting this implementation with students, having that conversation, as well as having it in the classrooms. So coming up with some sort of kind of script or guidance for how teachers can introduce this work to their students. I think that's really important. Setting the scene and having that context sounds a lot like what Noncy says is happening with the earth. But setting that context and setting that scene is really, really important, because you need students to understand from the very beginning why this is happening and what the end goal is, that it's not just learning new random facts, but understanding the depth of why this work is important and why it will stick with them. So if you have those conversations early with students and families, that will really help ease how you are able to implement and move through this work.
Thank you, Shauna.
I echo everything Maya Wilson said, and how that builds trust with families for sure. And something that we found that also built upon that was having a open door observation policy. So our school, for example, that's kind of the culture of our school anyways, like families can drop in, they can observe instruction at any time without an appointment, but we specifically re-messaged that at the start of the unit, the second year of implementation. And not everyone took us up on that offer, but I think just us saying you can come see what this lesson implementation looks like and sit next to your student while they're going through this content and material and process really helped families trust that we were doing something that was academically rigorous and ultimately empowering.
Thank you both, Maya and Shauna, for sharing those. I was just thinking of a teacher that I've worked with who has at the beginning of the year, in lieu of like the first like open house, they have one like individual listening conferences with each set of parents or caregivers or family members, the guardians for each of the students in her class, which I realize depends on your grade level, and starts by just saying what questions you have an understanding fears and building that trust really early through these listening conferences. So it reminds me a little bit of what I've seen work for her in her space. I'm looking over in the chat. I want to make sure I did not miss. Oh, please. Yes.
Sorry, can I just say one more thing on this question of the parent meetings and communications, because I've had the privilege of working with every network team that's gone through this program and seeing what this looks like. So, helping Noncy and Julie like make their slides for the parent meeting and think about what needs to be on here and seeing these things. And so like echoing everything that's said already, I think another thing that's really meaningful to parents is seeing the standards alignment that you will see in our units, that you will see in different things. So, this is not taking away from their kids' learning. It's not changing what is supposed to be taught. We're teaching American history per our standards, and we're approaching it in this way because we think that this is a way that'll help it be meaningful to your student, stay with your student longer, help them better understand the present world. I think that framing has helped. Also, making space for the questions that people have and the fears that are underneath them, right? Because there's a lot of like propaganda and things that are out there that you can't fault people for having. So if a parent's core fear is that engaging with this lesson is going to mean that my child hates America, right? It's not patriotic, and I don't want that, and it's really important to my family for whatever various reasons. We got Black History is American History per Nazi shirt, and then also open up Born on the Water and go through that book together and show the student drawing the flag at the end of the book and talk about how one could contextualize that as unpatriotic. In fact, on the other side of the spectrum, the project gets some critique for being too patriotic, right? So these are conversations, right? You're not telling the student to feel this way or that way about the flag or about the country, but finding out what their fear is actually probably the most productive way to figuring out how to engage them in that conversation and in that lesson, because our fears come from experiences, and some of that, maybe you'll have that conversation with the person and find out there's something else happening here. You're saying one thing, but there's something else here. But most parents, you can kind of get to the core of it and have that connection with them. So wish folks the best of luck with that. But yeah, this group especially has been rock star in that exact thing.
Thank you, DJ. I think it's time for me to turn it back to you. Actually, I can't believe it's as late as it is. But some of the questions that I see in the chat have been sort of addressed. I also invite anyone to reach out to me. I imagine my fellow panelists agree. But DJ, how would you like for us to close out, share contact info, etc.?
Absolutely, yes. Well, I will invite you now if you want to share any additional contact info in the chat, you can. There are bios for our speakers on the Zoom portal, and in your session guides, and you will see links to their units. If you're interested in like exploring some of the unit plans you heard about today, please do. And remember that this is the first of several learning webinars that we'll be doing as a part of this series. So in 2 weeks, we'll be back here speaking with some teachers about what I was just talking about with standards alignment. That session is called Teaching Truth is Standard. Our guest moderator, Deborah Lankart, is a partner from Zen Education Project. If folks are familiar with their resources, they do a Teach Truth Day of learning each year that we participate in, and we're really excited to invite her to participate in this event that we'll be holding. So we'll talk about what standards alignment with 1619 looks like across subjects, not just in history, but ELA, art. We've had teachers do STEM units with this. What does that look like? What does that mean? Invite other educators you think might benefit from this. And yeah, thank you for spending this time with us. That was just really great time. And thank you all once again, our presenters and Dr. Eller. Lovely.